As casualties mount, civilian resistance grows stronger. The United Nations says the military's brutal response to protests in Myanmar likely qualifies as a crime against humanity. So why is the international community standing by while the violence gets worse? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Myanmar's lethal crackdown. Well, the number of dead and detained continues to rise. There are reports of enforced disappearances and torture. Yet still, the junta has failed to deter Myanmar's anti-coup movement. Amnesty International, who documented the military's use of force against the Rohingya and other minorities, says the same tactics and weapons are now being used against peaceful protesters across the country. 6 weeks ago, General Min Aung Line and his troops took control by force, and since then, civil society and the economy have collapsed. So is it time for Myanmar's neighbors and political allies to rethink their policy of non-interference? And in the meantime, how should civilians continue their fight for democracy? Here's Natalie Pohonen.
Running for their lives. Anti-coup protesters in Myanmar are increasingly coming under fire. Since the military seized power in February, it has ramped up its use of deadly force with devastating consequences. Over the weekend, dozens of people were killed. The escalation in violence came after several Chinese-run factories were set on fire during protests on March 14. The crackdown from the authorities was swift and brutal. The junta has now declared martial law in parts of Yangon. More than 140 people have been killed since the military takeover. Kyu Chi-tin's 17-year-old son, a medical student, was shot dead. He's a good boy, she says, but now I have lost him. Now I have sacrificed my son. Days of protests are followed by days of mourning. Despite the grief and the trauma, the resistance against the military shows no signs of ending.
I don't want to live under the military junta. That's why I'm going out on the streets, even though I'm afraid, and I'm trying to avoid the danger as much as I can.
Now, the people are balancing on a tightrope, so if we fall from the rope, we could die suddenly.
Defiance in the face of an ever-growing death toll. Alongside demands for an end to the coup and a recommitment to democracy, demonstrators have urged the international community to intervene. Those calls have been heard and answered by some nations. The US and the UK have both condemned the junta and imposed sanctions on military officials, including the coup leader, General Min Aung Line.
In Burma, the military is attempting to overturn the results of a democratic election and is brutally repressing peaceful protesters.
Myanmar's northern neighbour, China, has expressed concern over the recent attacks on Chinese property and its citizens in Yangon, but says protesters need to express their demands legally.
We hope all parties in Myanmar can keep calm and restrained. This is in the fundamental interests of Myanmar people.
But should there be a political solution from inside the region? Is it time for ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, to step in? They have, after all, had first-hand experience of engaging with the military. In the 1990s, ASEAN brought Myanmar in from the cold when it invited the country to join the Union after decades of diplomatic isolation. While ASEAN does have a policy of non-interference, in recent weeks it's called on all parties to refrain from further violence. So should a regional diplomatic effort be at the core of the global response to help bring an end to the crisis? Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from London is Hnin. He is the UK chairperson of the National League for Democracy. From Geneva is Pwint. She is an officer at Burma Campaign UK and also the daughter of detained activist Mya Ai. Also with us is Khin Ohmar. She is the chair of the Progressive Voices Advisory Board. Thanks all so much for joining us. Win 9, I'll start with you. The international community may express good intentions, but that hasn't exactly translated into help for Myanmar's civilians themselves. Tell us what you think the pro-democracy movement actually needs to continue and to win their fight.
First of all, I would like to mention that I'm very sad by watching these live pictures of our people being tortured, gunned down, and suffering a lot. Unbelievable things are happening in our country. Even our outside people, the international community is not doing anything practically. We want practically as soon as possible. For a few days ago, the Quad, QUA, the Quad team, led by America, Japan, Australia, and India, they are trying to start doing. But we need the humanitarian intervention as soon as possible, especially military training and military equipment immunity as soon as possible to come into our country. Our people are crying for help and also asking the international pressure to come in as soon as possible. We want it as soon as possible. Thank you.
Okay, I'm trying to understand very clearly what you want. Are you asking for military intervention in some form, even perhaps arms for the people protesting? So do you not fear that that could escalate? Once you start arming protesters, that they can create militias and this can descend into civil war?
No, because they gun down the unarmed and peaceful demonstrators. It's very unfair. We only have to suffer. We don't have any action to give them back. They need to be suffered because there is too much. More than 2,000 people are arrested, detained, and 400 are students. And then nearly 300 are gunned down and already died, and so many people are injured. It's unbelievable things are happening. We can't bear anymore. We need the intervention, humanitarian intervention as soon as possible. Our people are suffering every minute. They are crying for help. We need urgent intervention and help as soon as possible. As I have mentioned, military training and also ammunition as soon as possible.
Okay, military intervention varies drastically from actual humanitarian intervention. I fail to see how you don't fear that this could descend, the entire country into all-out civil war, which could become even more brutal. You're talking about dozens of deaths so far. That could easily become thousands of deaths if both sides become armed. Khin Ohmar, let me ask you what you think of Win 9's take on what needs to happen.
I hear what Dr. Win 9 is saying is basically based on how the world keep watching without any concrete actions to stop the violence and atrocities on the ground that our people have to endure day and night. And I think that is the frustration also that I hear from the ground, that people are so helpless in spite of their ongoing commitment and defiance and resistance every day peacefully. What they are facing is the lethal force. So in that case, they are asking already the United Nations Security Council to actually dispatch a delegation to politically intervene, to monitor and stop the atrocities on the ground, which has not happened yet. So I can feel that frustration. But I will say, being a human rights activist all along myself, and also being a part of, organizing the 1988 pro-democracy uprising back in 1988, 32 years ago, I really think this regime will not negotiate. However, they will negotiate only if the United Nations and international community act together without any further ado, without any waiting. I think this is the moment that people are coming to the world with, what are you going to do for us? I think what Dr. Win 9 say is probably reflecting some of the voices on the ground, maybe, or his personal opinion, which I also I feel it, but I will not call for the military intervention. I don't think military intervention is the real solution for us. for our people, for our country. However, in that case is when the world is not acting, what is the option left for us? I think this is where I myself, with the belief in that there should be no military intervention.
Okay.
But I am also in the this moment of like, where is when is this world going to act?
Right.
Yeah.
Hnin, without military intervention, arguably civil disobedience is the most effective way to put pressure on the junta, because it paralyzes the economy, and the junta effectively cannot function without an economy underneath it to help support it. But you are very concerned about the actual sustainability issues around the civil disobedience movement. It's effective, but how long can Myanmar's people afford not to work?
That's what I'm telling you.
Excuse me, Hnin, let her, I want her to speak first. Go ahead.
It's been 45 days since the coup started, and every day we see people dying on the street, and more people are getting arrested. But at the same time, people are still very strong and still very brave, and people who are involved in civil disobedience movement are still very strong. And without them, the government, can't open schools, hospitals, banks. So, but I worry, like you said, about the long-term sustainability issue, because people, my country is not a wealthy country, and we don't have welfare state. So people with very little or no income will suffer in the long term. And I think the military know that very well. So they are using all the tactics they could use. They're arresting people, and they're waiting the CDM movement to give up. So that's why it's very important that this movement continue, and we need any help that they can get from the international community. But of course, it's been 45 days. We keep asking for any types of help the international community can give, but all we are getting so far is, oh, we're really concerned about the situation, or we condemn the situation. We don't, we haven't received any practical help from the international community. Of course, they impose some sanctions on military generals. That's only a few military generals, but they freeze assets in the EU and the US. But only what that means is that it's a visa ban, because military generals in Burma don't have assets in EU or the US. And so what they mean is they can't travel to some countries, and that's the punishment that they get. So what we are saying is, so far, what the international community doing is so little, and it's not enough to help the CDM movement or the protesters on the ground.
Right. Hnin, quickly, how long do you fear it may be before people do see the need potentially to upgrade to military resistance?
We need a few...
Let Hnin just quickly weigh in on this. Hnin, go ahead.
Yes. Of course, I understand the frustration, because people are dying on the street. They're peaceful protesters. I would emphasize in peaceful, because they don't have any weapons. They're going out simply risking their lives, asking for democracy and human rights. And I understand their frustrations that, oh, we don't have any guns and the militaries are using violence. But personally, I believe that military intervention in this day and age to Burma is not possible, and also is not the solution that we want.
Okay. Nine, go ahead.
Right. We have written the letter to Barbara Woodward, to UNSC, on the 7th of February and 11th of February to send an envoy. Not yet happened now. That's why I'm telling you. People are dying every day. They are crying for help, and nobody is helping them. They can't resist like this. CDM is not enough only. Today, the military coup the general has declared that they are reopening all the hospitals as much as they can. They are trying to sue the civilians, the service people who are not coming back from CDM. So CDM is not enough. I don't think CDM is not enough. I think CDM is not enough. That's why I'm telling you, international community must give help as soon as possible, especially military intervention. Okay. That is the only solution.
Okay. Hnin, let me come back to you, because while most of your contemporaries in Myanmar are fighting for the release of Aung San Suu Kyi and the return to power of the NLD, you actually do not see the National League for Democracy and Aung San Suu Kyi as the future of your country. But for the time being, however, do you at least support this fight to return her and the NLD party to power until another, perhaps legitimate election can be held?
Yeah. Yes.
We need to...
Win Nine, just hold on one second. Wayne Nin, go ahead.
So my country is a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religion country. So for the future, if we really want to have peace and reconciliation and true federal democracy, we need to look beyond the Aung San Suu Kyi and NLD party, because we have so many ethnic minorities in our country. Of course, even in the past 10 years, the human rights abuses against the ethnic minorities continue. We might have some freedom in cities area, but in ethnic area, people were still dying, people were still being killed by the military. So to move forward, of course, Aung San Suu Kyi, President Win Myint, and all the political prisoners should be released, and they should be a democratically elected government should be reinstated. But for the future, to move forward, we need to look beyond the NLD, and we need to start listening to what ethnic minorities in my country really want.
Okay, Khin Ohmar, if I can ask you more of a personal question, I'm wondering if anybody in Myanmar working for a pro-democracy organization like yours actually feels safe in Myanmar right now. Is it a matter of time before we might see an exodus of the very people that try to protect the human rights of people on the ground in your country?
Right now, nobody feels safe in Myanmar because the terror campaign by this junta against the people is day and night. And nobody feels, the civil society organizations, including our organization, nobody is feeling safe at this point anymore. They are going after pretty much every democratic opponent and every human rights components of the society. So it's a very extremely dangerous situation at the moment. It's not only on those young people and the people who are peacefully, continue to be very committedly, peacefully protesting on the streets, but also those who are even at their houses or they are their offices. They don't feel safe anymore because the junta is really coming after them. So yeah, but I see, what I want to say is there is huge frustration, like Wayne Nin said. But also, I just want to say that there are also many opportunities for the people's movement to abolish this military dictatorship once and for all. I think we must also see that so far, this military junta is not successful yet with their attempted coup. And they are actually shocked by how much of this resistance, defiance people coming from the people, especially from the government sectors, public and private sector workers. This is something that they probably didn't even imagine that people will rise up against them like that. So I think what we really need is this in this moment. I mean, one thing that I want to also point out in connection to what Wayne said is that the people coming together now, the generations from previous and now, and also from all different ethnic and religious communities, everybody coming together is to move forward for a federal democratic union, meaning nobody has the plan to go backward or to go to go back to the status quo. Okay. I think this is something that the political actors are coming to be also understand at this point, which I find it quite encouraging. Yes.
Okay, Khin Ohmar, I will have to give you the last word. Very unfortunately, we are out of time for this segment of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists really so much for joining us.
It is absolutely essential to respect the result of the elections and to allow for a situation in which we move back to a democratic transition. With all its imperfections, I believe that it is important to go back to where we were before the coup. It is absolutely essential to release all prisoners.
That Myanmar security forces have murdered at least 70 people. Madam President, those murdered were fathers, sons, mothers, daughters, husbands, and wives. More than half of those murdered were members of Generation Z, or young people under the age of 25. The junta is detaining dozens, sometimes hundreds every day. The total number of arbitrary arrests and detentions since the 1st of February had risen beyond 2,000. The people of Myanmar are desperate. They need the help of the international community, and they need it now.
Okay, let's take a closer look now at the role foreign powers could play in resolving the crisis in Myanmar. And joining me from Kuala Lumpur is the chair of ASEAN Parliamentarians for Human Rights, Charles Santiago. Thank you so much for being with us. We are consistently hearing strongly worded expressions of solidarity with the protesters and condemnation of the military, but you have generals who are so accustomed, to being pariahs that words have almost no effect on their psyche. So let's talk about action. What have you seen or haven't seen so far from the international community that could actually change things on the ground?
I think this far, from February 1st to now, we see all kinds of statements coming from the United Nations, from the United States government, from China, from ASEAN. But these are all nice words and not decisive, though. Nobody is saying that we have to put a stop to the violence that is happening right now. Everybody is saying, let's have dialogue, let's have a discussion going on. But this is not going to stop the violence that we see being unleashed against the people of Myanmar. I think what needs to happen right now is the countries, the ASEAN, the Association of South Asian Nations, have an important responsibility to rein in the army. The other country that also is quite important in reining in the army would be China and Russia, though.
Right. What worries me, though, I'm sorry to break in, ASEAN in principle has a somewhat contradictory charter in that it pledges to respect the rule of law, it pledges to respect good governance and human rights, but because of that non-interference clause, it has to essentially ignore when those very principles are violated.
Exactly.
Go ahead. What can ASEAN realistically do?
This is the issue that ASEAN has. This is a very embarrassing moment for ASEAN, where for the second time in 2 years, you have a situation in Myanmar, first involving the massacre of Rohingyas in Rakhine State, and now the same general is involved in organizing a coup d'etat against a legitimately elected government. So ASEAN is really in a very embarrassing moment because the ASEAN Charter is unable to rein in, or ASEAN as a regional grouping is unable to rein in the generals of Myanmar. Now, this is very shameful, though. The most recent meeting that took place in over Skype and over the net, involving the foreign ministers, came out with a very lame statement. Very, very lame statement, though. Now, it is this kinds of statement that gives the junta, the military junta, the rationale to go against people of Myanmar. This has this stop. So we, in some sense, are legitimizing, as your thing says, what is happening in Myanmar, and this is where a regional bloc, of 50 or 60 over years is unable to respond to the most vulnerable community, and this time the most challenged community in the region.
Absolutely.
This is an outright shame, though. It's an outright shame, and I think our leaders should be ashamed of themselves.
Right. It's important to point out as well that it would be very difficult for ASEAN to justify, so-called interference in Myanmar when right next door in Thailand, nothing was done when the military took power in the 2014 coup there. But let me ask you about China. China is obviously hugely influential, but it doesn't want instability necessarily in Myanmar. It did not reject Myanmar under the NLD and Aung San Suu Kyi. We have to remember that. In fact, it probably actually appreciated her stance, at least, on the Rohingya issue and the fact that the NLD kept Myanmar open to Chinese industry and investment. So why wouldn't China want to take a stance here? I know it gets along just fine with the military, but why wouldn't it actually prefer the leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi, who it actually also got along with very well and who is internationally accepted?
Going by the initial statements of the Chinese government, the Foreign Office of the Chinese government, it appeared to me that they were in a bit of a shock and they did not really support the coup d'etat. And also the Chinese government supported the UN's declaration or decision of not of asking to rein in the army, and there's no violence in the country though, in Myanmar. So you can see the Chinese are not entirely happy with what the military is doing, but at the same time, the bullets, the arms, the equipment, and so on and so forth are coming from China. So China can actually withdraw, if they want, the support for the military and inform the military that they are not supporting this coup, especially the way it is being the unleash of terror and violence against innocent people, though.
Okay.
Some people are calling this a civil war. It is not a civil war. A civil war involves two different groups of people who are armed, fighting it out. But here, these are unarmed civilians who are just, just the bodies and protesting against a coup, which actually was organized by a military who lost an election.
Right. Charles Santiago, unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. We are out of time for this edition of The Newsmakers. Thank you really so much for joining us, and thank you to our viewers as well. We'll see you next time.